First off is the Easy Heat ready-made cables, whether they're for gutter or for pipe. It's an easy plug-and-play system. It comes with a plug already on it, comes with a thermal sensor, things like that. And you just get it in set lengths, wrap your pipe, and away you go. We have the Raychem ready-made. This just happens to be a 100-foot model for gutters and pipe with the plug already on it, so and an end already on it. You can just use that as a ready-made system also. You have what is known as a truck pack by Raychem also. Basically what that is just 100 feet or 50 feet of cable, and then you have to start adding all the parts to it because you can cut it to whatever length you want.
This one right here always has parts to it already.
Right. And then you have the Raychem Guardian and Winter Wet Plus. The difference between the Raychem cables and the Easy Heat is that you can see the difference of the cables where the pipe cable is minus a sheath. So it's a little less expensive. You don't need that sheath inside, okay? This is an inside cable, it's not for gutters. And that's the big difference between the Raychem cables. The advantage of the Easy Heat, they're less expensive and they're ready to go. I mean, it's just, you take the package, you use it, and that's it, and plug it in. The advantage of the Raychem is that they can be cut to any length, they can be teed, they can be wide, you name it, okay? It's easy to tee these cables like this, add another cable, increase the length of the cable if you need to, shorten it, cut it to whatever length you want. So that's the advantage of the Raychem cable. Besides pipes and gutters, you can also heat fountains. There's fountain heaters, there's bird bath heaters and stuff like that, so you don't have to shut off your fountains in the wintertime if you don't really want to. There's bubblers and all sorts of things available from these companies. So if you want to keep your fountains and bird baths up for the winter and be kind to our furry friends and whatnot, away you go.
Could I heat my swimming pool with it?
I don't think so. Swimming pools have their own heating systems.
Yeah.
All right. That is the basic types of the advantages and disadvantages, okay? Now we'll get to one of the disadvantages. The Easy Heat cables are a series type cable, and it's a resistance cable. So if there's a problem anywhere on that cable, the whole cable shuts down, okay? The Raychem cables are what are known as a parallel system. You have two conductors going out, but there's a constant interaction between those two cables. So if there's a little problem somewhere in the cable, it doesn't shut the whole cable down. Okay, you just have a little problem, and it can be repaired also if it came to that. All right, so these won't shut down. If there's a little problem here, the rest of the cable functions as it should. So that is your disadvantage of the less expensive cable. If there's a problem somewhere in the cable, it's gone. It will not function anymore.
What's kind of the average shelf life of that type of?
Well, they're guaranteed for 2 years.
And they generally are pretty reliable.
Yeah. Those are guaranteed for 2 years. The Raychem for 10 years. I've had installations out in the marketplace now for almost 20, still running strong as far as I know, because nobody's called me.
You're on line 6, Carla, line 6.
All right. Wiring of these things. Let's switch over and say you can see all the product, but why mainly, do electricians install these things? Why don't roofing contractors install them and the people that install the gutters? Why don't plumbers install them on the pipes as they're working on the pipes? There's an easy reason for that. Between 1/2 and 3/4 of the job of doing this kind of work is getting the power where you need it. Okay, especially in gutter systems. In a basement with pipes, there's usually a couple outlets somewhere. But the problem is that circuit, able to handle that amperage. But when you get into gutter systems, a lot of times you don't have the power where you need it, and somebody has to get it there. All right. Depending on the type of roofing you have, pipes really don't matter. Most of this is safe for PVC, CPVC, copper, the metallic iron. The pipe heating cables, you really don't have to worry about too much on what type of pipe you have. If you're talking about putting cables on a roof, especially some flat roofs, besides shingle roof, there you're probably talking about the Raychem as opposed to the Easy Heat, because these are in a lot of cases not guaranteed for flat roofs. They're really designed for the shingle type roof where you're just on top of the shingles. Some of them get a little too hot for tar roofs and the rubber roofs and whatnot. And whoever's doing the installation should be talking to their roofer and say, listen, can I put these cables directly on the roof, or do I have to protect the material on the roof in any way? I've done a lot of installations where it lays on the roof, I run it through PVC pipe. Pipes heats up just as the cable does, but it's just another layer of protection for the rubber roofs and the tar roofs. And it also helps protect the cable from the sun too. When you're talking about the electric, first off, how many circuits are you going to need? A lot of bigger buildings have multiple downspouts. Are you going to be able to, in fact, wire one circuit, or are you going to need multiple circuits? Where's the panel that you're going to pull this power from? Is there enough power in that panel to support the length of cable you need to handle your gutter system? This is all questions you're going to have to answer, or whoever you hire is going to have to answer before you even start with the installation of the cable. Okay? A lot of times you'll have to run conduit up the outside of a building. In Chicago, that is metallic conduit, either aluminum, or it should be heavy wall or intermediate conduit, not the thin wall that we use inside walls. I see a lot of the normal thin wall outside. You might expect 10 years of life out of it because it's going to start rusting. Whereas the heavy wall will be there forever, or the aluminum is not going to rust at all. All right, so I always recommend the aluminum because it doesn't rust at all and it looks better. Plastic in Chicago is only used underground at this point. Okay, there is plastic conduit. It is legal underground, so if you had to run to your garage and protect your garage or whatever, you can do that underground. Or even Romex itself is legal underground without a pipe. So you have underground Romex, you have plastic pipe that you can go underground with. You don't worry about a thing. Besides the wiring, once you figure out the wiring, where you're going to either hardwire something through an electric box or have an outlet here, and you want to just plug it in and then loop into the gutter system, that's fine too. But again, it's metallic boxes, weatherproof, everything like that. If in fact you are going to plug in outside, there's two requirements, actually three requirements in Chicago for wiring up a gutter system, and one for the piping system. Number one, those circuits must be GFI protected. Whether you plug into a GFI at that location or you wire in a GFI breaker, okay, into the panel to protect the whole circuit. You can tell a GFI breaker because it has a neutral whip on it, whereas most breakers you attach a hot wire to it and that's it. A GFI breaker has to run a balanced pair, hot and neutral. You'll see the two screws, one for hot, one for neutral, and then this goes to the neutral bar. So that protects the circuit. The second is that unless you're running plastic gutters, it doesn't matter at that point, the gutter system itself should be grounded, just in case there is some sort of accident, like if one of these things shorts out and you got steel and aluminum gutters, that gutter system can go live. Well, you want it grounded so it blows the circuit breaker or the GFI. How do you do that? Relatively easy. There's multiple ways. One of the simplest is to bolt a cable to the gutter system and then the other side to the conduit that you're running. So now I have a direct ground from the electric conduit that is grounded already to the gutter system. Done. If you are in fact using plugs in Chicago, well actually nationwide now, not just Chicago, it used to be just Chicago and New York, you must use what's known as an in-use cover. All that is another cover that goes on top of this box, okay, and allows you to close a cover over the plug. So no moisture, so no water gets in. Moisture will still, get in a little bit, but you must, if it's plugged in and not observed, you must use an in-use cover. And that's nationwide now. It has been nationwide for at least 2 years. How are you going to control these cables is another question. All right? Probably nobody wants to go outside and plug a plug in when it's snowing out. So you have to figure out where you're going to put a switch, where you're going to put a timer, or if in fact you are going to use some sort of control mechanism to control these cables automatically. Timers are what I think better than switches, because some people leave the switch on and then the cable's on all the time. You don't need these cables when it's cold, okay? If there's no moisture, these cables don't have to run. If it's not snowing, these cables don't have to run. All you want is when it's snowing and when the snow starts melting, okay, is when you want these cables to be running so they can prevent an ice dam or freezing up of the gutter system, because sometimes especially on flat roof systems, if the snow starts melting and then hits a frozen gutter, that water can refreeze in the gutter system. And now you're starting to cause ice dams again. So as it melts, you want to make sure that these cables are also functioning. Timers are good for that, and there are control mechanisms that you can plug your cabling into, and not only it senses humidity in the air and temperature. If the temperature is above, let's say, 40 degrees, these cables aren't going to turn on. If there's no moisture in the air, it's a combination. They're not going to turn on. If it's snowing and under 40 degrees, they'll start to turn on. This just happens to be an easy heat one. I've used them in a couple systems already, and they're pretty good. They're not cheap. I think this one runs in the range of $80. The Raychem ones, they have separate sensing systems. The Raychem ones are, again, guaranteed for 10 years or so, but they can literally double the cost of your installation. And the Raychem cable itself is not cheap, so you'll know that the Raychem stuff is a little on the expensive side. They can literally just double the cost of your equipment you're putting in. There's also ways that you all hear about the home automation systems. Raychem and a couple other companies make thermostats that can run these things. They're remote thermostats that can sense the temperature in the cable, and you can control them off a microprocessor. Now you can dial them up on your phone, just like your home thermostat. Okay, so there's remote microprocessor type equipment out there. Just as you can monitor your home, you can monitor your gutter systems also, and your pipe systems to make sure everything's online, and get automatic warnings if it's not also. Again, the expense is what you're looking at. The automatic systems aren't necessarily cheap. One of the things you learn on the Raychem cable, and I just have an example here of here's what the cable looks like when you get it. This is what it would look like when you're starting to run a power connection. You can see the two parallel conductors, okay? They parallel down the edge of each cable. And this black material that embeds these wires, okay, is your actual conductor. It's a plastic conductor. And the colder the weather gets, the warmer this cable will get. And some of that's explained in the handouts you've got, or a little in here also. So this is a self-regulating cable. I don't recommend to leave it on all the time just because it is self-regulating. But as the temperature gets warmer, this cable basically shuts itself down to the tune of maybe 3%. It'll always have some power running through it. That's why during the summer and spring and everything, you should shut them down, just because you're just wasting that energy anyway. You don't need it. But you have no fear about this thing heating up in the summer and burning through your roof or gutter. And this is basically what the connection looks like, which brings us to some of the tools you need when you're working with this stuff. Number one, besides your normal electric tools that you're going to need between, linesman's pliers and wire strippers and cutters of some sort and screwdrivers to get into the boxes, there are two tools you definitely need when you're working with these cables. Number one, a very good sharp razor knife, because you have to be splitting this cable in order to get it off, okay? So you definitely need a sharp razor knife with new blades. And number two, you need some sort of torch because the stuff is put together with shrink tubing. Okay, when the connections are done in an outdoor box, there's shrink tubing that goes over all these connections, and you need a torch or an electric blower, almost like a paint stripper, in order to shrink that shrink tubing. I found this to be, because they're small little pieces, this to be one of the handiest little things there are, okay, because it acts as a mini torch and, one filling and you can be done with a connection. So those two tools have to be in your toolbox when you start working with this stuff. Just a requirement. Now, if, and this is aside from all this, if in fact you already have ice dams, is all this equipment going to help you? No, it's already too late. Now is the time to start installing these cables, okay? You have 2 months of, I'll say, relatively good weather, okay? October, November. Once you get into December, it starts getting kind of iffy, all right? Maybe the first half of December, but now you're cold and working in the cold. At least October, November, you're going to have some good days. You can get up on the roof. You're not freezing yourself off. You can plan, you can measure, you can cut, you can install, and still, have a relatively good time out there. But if you do have an ice dam already there, this is not going to help you, and then you have to resort to chemicals. Once you free up the gutter, then you can start to install this kind of thing, the gutters and the downspouts. So just remember, if in fact your gutters and your downspouts are frozen, and you want to, take care of that real problem, then you have to go to the ice dam blasters and first response and things like that. That'll free up that ice instantly, prevent leaks, and permit you to start installing this type of equipment. Any questions?
How much overall energy output do those take? Moderate, not a lot of.
No, not that much. They will give, but there's charts that they can give you. I think the easy heats probably use a lot more energy than the ray chems because they are self-regulating, but they will give you lengths of cable that you can run for 10, 15, 20, and up to 30 amp. If you needed much longer runs, there are cables by the Raychem people that can run 240 volt. Actually, there's some that can run 357, I believe. But now we're starting to talk industrial cables and
The shorter the length, probably the less energy output.
right.
In general, yeah.
Most installations that I put in, even though I put in, let's say, 20 amp breakers, I found that, in extreme cold, they're running about 5-6 amp. And this is for a couple hundred feet of cable out there. So it's not that big of a draw, even under extreme cold. And again, it could be 0 out there, but if it's not snowing, this thing does not have to be on.
I had one more question. It's a more personal one. I don't want to dominate. So I have a exposed pipe in a bathroom that's under. It's kind of adjacent to the house next to it. So it's insulated, but it gets cold. So I want to use a device to wrap around this water pipe, the hot and cold. So when it gets cold. So what would you recommend for that?
Well, now you said this is outside?
No, it's
Or under-
next to the kitchen. Like, They did an addition, kind of. So it's just an addition, and there is insulation, but it's still more exposed because it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of buildings like that where the pipes are run in uninsulated areas and they never should have been there in the first place. But yeah, any of the pipe cables would, you know, would suit your needs, and you know, you can get the plug and play where it's an automatic thermostat. It'll turn on at a certain temperature and start self-controlling it. Thought we had one other here. And again, though, make sure that everything is GFI protected. That's, you know, but yeah, I would definitely recommend if there's cold air blowing through where the piping is, I definitely recommend not only putting it on the pipes, you may think about doing the drain also. Drains can start, especially if you're draining cold water as opposed to warm, they can start to build up ice inside them. But definitely do the hot and cold water. And believe it or not, hot water tends to freeze up faster for whatever reason than the cold does. But you can get more damage on a cold line than you can a hot line. Simply because hot water tanks, some of them should, well, all of them technically should have an expansion valve in them. Most of them don't, expansion tank, but they also have pop-off. So if the pressure gets too great, they'll pop off and relieve some of that water pressure in there, and they get less damage.
I'll check that too. An old house, so who knows what they have.
That's basically about, you know, I could go on a lot on how to strip this stuff, but you're going to want to read the you know, the directions yourself, because you're going to be doing the work, or whoever's doing the installation, read up on it. Every time I install, I know I go through the directions, because you have to do this, 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 and this, and this. And one of these connections can take about 10 minutes because of all the shrink tubing you have to add, and this ground was actually wrapped around this whole thing. I have to get all this cabling out from the center of this ground and then use it to connect the ground. That process there is probably about 5 minutes. Just weaseling the conductors out of that ground takes about 5 minutes of time. You'll see in your handout, there's an extensive chart in the back for peaked roofs and slanted roofs and everything, on how to figure out lengths of cable. Flat roofs are fairly easy. You know, you're measuring the downspout, the length of that, and measuring the gutter systems, and maybe any additional cable you want on the flat roof. Also remember that you want to extend this cabling system about 4 feet into the ground, where the ground never freezes. Okay, because if you stop this far from the ground, okay, that part of the pipe can then, that part of the gutter system can then freeze. So you definitely want to extend this thing a number of feet into the ground, down the gutter system, all right, and that keeps the whole system flowing very nicely. As you buy some of these packages, you'll see that there are in fact warning labels that you put on your gutter system saying there is, you know, de-icing cable in this gutter. Do not, you know, start ripping the gutter system apart. And the same thing where they're plugged in, you'll see GFI protected, you know, gutter de-icing. Obviously on a pipe system you don't need the warnings because you can see it right there on the pipe. But with a gutter system, in a lot of cases, you won't see the cabling, and you don't want anybody, you know, so something happens with your gutter, you call the roofing guy, he comes, starts ripping apart the gutter system to do a replacement, and all of a sudden he cuts through the cable. Not good. So you'll see warning labels that they can then put on the gutter systems and say, hey, don't touch.